Because you didn't do what he said? You know what? You know what? You just made the list! I'm gonna have to go tell the world exactly what's on the list of Jericho. You just made the list!
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is episode 1 of the Middle-Aged Outlaws podcast. My name is Ross Trotter, aka the Road Pod, Jesse James. It's never worked. And I'm here with my co-host Adam Anderson, aka Big Pod. How's it going, Adam?
Yeah, not bad, thanks.
Good. So our vision for this podcast is basically to give us an hour and a half every now and again to get together and talk about wrestling. Something that we probably can't get away with doing in our everyday lives. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think it's not really cool anymore, is it? Not when you get to this kind of age, but
yeah. So our idea is let's take a subject for each episode, and we'll each do a list of our top 5 of whatever that subject might be. Come together and chat about it, and have a little debate. Our very first episode and our very first topic is going to be top 5 heel turns, which probably sounds like an easy one to start off with, but when you start looking into things, it was actually quite difficult. I don't know. Do you feel the same?
yeah, I think I thought at first, there's a few obvious ones that stand out, and then when you start really thinking about it, I think I got in touch with you last week just saying, "Oh no, I've changed one." I had a sudden late panic, and then vice versa as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good options out there when you're talking about something like that, and actually rounding it down became quite difficult.
Yeah, definitely. I know I messaged you earlier. I have changed mine. I've changed one of mine. I've just finished watching one of the matches about 2 minutes ago. So, like you say, I might actually change as we're halfway through our list. Let's see. Before we get into our picks, should we just talk about what makes a good heel turn?
Yep.
And potentially what doesn't make a good heel turn? What makes a good heel turn to you?
I think, there has to be an element of surprise in a sense that, not to say you didn't see it coming, and maybe, there's a slow build, and that's what I prefer. When you're talking about heel turn, is just there to have been quite a few hints along the way, and then suddenly, it happens. But I think as well, the people involved, they have to have had a bond for, a good amount of time or for a good reason, and then suddenly for that to kind of be shattered. But I mean, I've moaned to you probably quite a few times in recent times about the fact that everything feels like it's a story and a different story every week nowadays, whereas what for me kind of always worked is when things were laid out over the course of a few months and you just saw things gradually unravel. That always worked for me.
Yeah, that kind of slow build, that's the kind of ideal scenario when it comes to a heel turn.
Yeah, and I think as well, you have to be kind of getting something out of it in terms of maybe you don't have enough baby faces or heels, depending on what your card looks like at the top, middle, or bottom, and maybe you need someone to turn. I think that plays a part as well in looking for a good turn.
So, an example of a really good heel turn recently would have been Tucker turning on Owen.
I mean, I suppose time will tell how much they actually get out of that mileage-wise, but
my favourite thing about that is that like obviously they're a tag team and all that sort of stuff, and he's randomly turned on him, hit him with the briefcase, whatever the most recent pay-per-view was, and then the next night on Raw he was wearing proper jobber trousers, and he didn't even get an entrance. He didn't have music or anything. He was just standing in the ring to fight against Ricochet.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the other thing that you sometimes see in it, because so often when there's the turn, it's from like one team member to another, and you end up kind of losing one in the shuffle as well. You know, one guy will be pushed to the top, and the other guy just kind of disappears.
Yeah, I can definitely, on my list here, I can think of a perfect example. I'm guessing you might have that similar example on yours.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Honourable mentions. It's probably dangerous to talk about honourable mentions before we do the list, isn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking that because I did note down a few, and then I thought I'm going to mention this, and then it's going to be on Ross's list. So I don't know if it's worth bringing up just now, or maybe leave until later.
Let's leave them till the end, and that sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Okay. I promised you a rant on the Roman Reigns heel turn, but I'll maybe leave that till the end as well.
Fair enough.
I think. Yeah, let's just leave it. So I can feel the fire burning. Okay. What do we think? Do you want to kick us off? Number 5.
Yep, I'm happy to get us started.
Cool, let's do it.
So I'm going to mention a few times as I go through it things that seemed big, maybe because of the kind of age I was at the time.
Yeah, I've totally been feeling that when I've been doing the list. Yeah.
So I started, having an interest in wrestling and all that when I was probably about 8, 9 years old, something like that. And it was buying old videos. They weren't of the current events and things like that. They were basically whatever the shop had. Yeah. So one of the first that I remember seeing and buying was WrestleMania 5, which featured top of the card the Hogan v Savage feud. So what I've gone for as my number 5 is when the Mega Powers exploded. So just for a little bit of background, Hogan, obviously the ultimate star of the company. Savage joins mid-80s, and through 87, he makes a turn from heel to babyface. He'd entered as a heel, really playing off the sort of staged, probably mostly animosity between him and Elizabeth, although some of that might have been reality. And then obviously they take advantage of the fact that I think they've got by then DiBiase and Andre as the top line heels, and they felt they needed to align somebody with Hogan. So they kind of start the build by directly involving Elizabeth, and then there's a Saturday night main event in October 87 when Hogan comes out and makes the save on Savage while he's being beaten down by the Hearts and Honky Tonk Man. And it's as a direct result of Elizabeth going back and bringing Hogan out. So she is kind of the catalyst between this union between the two of them. So from then on, they're kind of, they've got each other's backs, and Savage returns the favour, bails out Hogan. And then there's this whole infamous, which could be talked about at a later date, title debacle where Andre takes the belt off Hogan, dubious circumstances, and then sells it to DiBiase. So it's now basically the title's been held up, and it'll be decided in a match at Mania 4. So even before Mania 4, you're talking more than a 1-year build to that Mania 5 match. You've sort of bedded why they would be a union together. And then Savage goes on to win the title tournament at WrestleMania 4 with help from Hogan, who's in his corner, kind of evening up the numbers. And through sort of the course of the year from then on, everything's, all good, all happy and merry. They have SummerSlam and Survivor Series matches teaming up together. So I think the first ever SummerSlam, 88, Savage and Hogan against Andre and DiBiase. And that's the one where Elizabeth, hops up onto the ringside and whips off her little skirt to distract everyone. And then you just start to see some little hints that Savage is starting to get a bit jealous and a bit anxious with the Hogan and Liz relationship. He'll celebrate more with her after a win, and there's just little subtle looks and things like that. And based on a lot of stuff we've heard, some of that might have been genuine. To be honest, I think he was quite dominant and controlling in the situation.
Yeah.
And I do think that's another part we'll probably talk about where you can build in some, real life scenarios to the story. I think it always helps. So
that's what I was just going to kind of jump on, is that WWE, for all their faults, and WWF at that time, they're so good at kind of layering in kayfabe mixed with a little bit of real life in there, and especially in the really good stories. And they can take it too far. I think we've probably seen the McMahons on TV about 100 million times too many, but they are really good at that. And that example is just perfection, really.
Mm-hmm. And you can. It's one of those where I think who your good guy is, even from the early, glances and things like that. You're supposed to back Hogan because he's the ultimate babyface, and Savage had already been the heel in the company, so I think that's underlying in there. So while they're teasing it, the two of them are still teaming together, winning matches and things like that. And then there's an incident where Hogan is being beaten down by the Twin Towers, so Bossman and Akeem, and Savage comes out.
Akeem the African Dream.
Akeem the African Dream, yeah. They wouldn't get away with that nowadays. And then, so Savage comes out and makes a save with a chair. Liz just leaves immediately to go backstage with Hogan. Again, Savage just kind of stood in the ring looking around thinking, where's everyone gone? I'm stood here on my own. And they're sort of turning it where he's the third wheel rather than, you would assume it would be Hogan naturally. And then the January 89 Royal Rumble, you have a situation where Hogan accidentally eliminates Savage from the Rumble match. It's in the process of eliminating other people. Savage is caught up in the melee. He goes over the rope. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of animosity. And then it kind of dies down from then on. It isn't the same sort of TV world that we're in now, where there's the two big shows per week every week. So you can do things a little bit slower, and also even then when they had things like Saturday Night's Main Event, not everyone's on every show, So the next big moment that comes really is in the Main Event 2, where it's Hogan and Savage via the Twin Towers. Savage is thrown over the top rope and accidentally hits Liz on his landing. Hogan takes Liz backstage, honourable thing, trying to get the woman out of harm's way, but Savage sees it as he's being abandoned 2-on-1 to take the beating from the Twin Towers. And this is really where it all kicks off. And this is one of the big things that caught me as a kid, because all I'm doing is I'm watching the Mania 5 video, and it shows you little snippets of the build-up. And there's this backstage fight between Savage and Hogan. And at this point, I'm only on about my second or third VHS. And I've never seen a backstage fight, and it just looked and felt real. And he's going for him. The jealousy feelings boiled over. He's accusing Hogan of, trying to muscle in on his wife, things like that. And they just end up in a full-on fight backstage, which just as a kid looked and felt different to anything I'd ever seen before. That was kind of the tipping point, and that was really there's probably no way back for these two as a team now. And then from there, it really starts the build to the Mania 5, because Savage is still champion and Hogan's the challenger now for the belt. And they get embroiled in this situation where there's Liz, who's refusing to take either side. So she's kind of in the middle. And I think they're probably, as a company, wanting to keep her babyface regardless, but they don't. It's a tough one, because she has to be kind of honourable to both if she's going to play that role. She can't backstab anyone. She can't turn on the company's biggest babyface, but also she can't turn on her husband, really, if she wants to remain in that kind of role. So she's neutral all the way through. And then, so April 89 Mania 5 title match. There's not, I may mention this a few times through it, there's not that many Hogan matches that I like from a wrestling point of view. But Savage is such a general in there. He gets a really good match, really high quality. And Liz is prominent all through it, but not directly involved in it. She's kind of in a neutral corner, eventually gets sent backstage. Hogan does his hulking up after the elbow drops, and then big boot, leg drop, wins the belt. Liz doesn't join in with the celebrations or anything like that. She does remain neutral. She's actually more looking like she's trying to look after Savage at the end of it, and he's pushing her away and things like that. So that was really kind of how that one all came about.
That is amazing. Like, I think I did consider it, but I think have convinced me from going through that and the slow build and the character development that is now my number. It's not my number one, but that it's like the blueprint for a slow build. But like, I think in the era that it was in, you can perfectly get away with that type of slow build.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, you don't have what do they have, 2 3-hour shows, a 3-hour and a 2-hour show every week, albeit different brands, but then you sometimes have 2 pay-per-views in a month. You have guys feuding over social media. That just would never ever play out the same way these days, but for its time, it's just absolute classic, isn't it?
And the other, for me, big thing out of it, which is one of the things I was going to touch on earlier when we talk about, or probably did touch on when we talk about what makes a good heel turn, is that you now have a top of the card heel, a top of the card babyface. Andre's getting older; he can't really keep having matches with Hogan, and Savage takes on this whole new persona of Macho King, and
that's what I was going to ask. Is that when Macho King, he became Macho King?
So he'd actually,
sensational share.
Before they made King of the Ring a pay-per-view tournament, which they did a few years later, it was more like a big event house show. It wasn't televised, and he had won it, but as a babyface, he wasn't really playing off it, and he was world champion anyway. So as soon as he'd lost the belt and became a heel, or full-blown heel, he really started playing on the Macho King gimmick and aligning himself with Sherry, who had always been a heel manager. So you kind of, I think it's really easy for a casual audience member to look at the managers and say he's gone from Elizabeth to Sherry. So he's a bad guy now, that kind of thing. And then they basically played through a whole feud for the next 6 months, including incorporating the Zeus character from I've forgotten the name of the film. That's the one. Who obviously needed to be aligned with a wrestler to make it work, but it was Savage he was partnered with, and that sort of took them all through the summer months and things like that. And so you got a lot of payoff and a lot of matches out of it, a lot of top of the card matches, which was important. Obviously, Hogan maybe didn't need it, but he did always need a good heel to be working against. So that's my number 5. But I may have rambled a bit. It is the one I had the most notes about because it went on so long, the build.
It's that long development now. That was amazing. Thank you. And just on your point there about getting something out of the heel turn, like Savage was just an amazing heel. Proper, unhinged, crazy man. He was just amazing, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's one of those guys where I much preferred him as the heel, and that's even me as a kid, because I just thought it was kind of before cool heels were a thing, but I was kind of looking at it and thinking, I know this guy's bad, but he's kind of awesome as well.
Okay, so I'm going to take us forward in time. I'm going to take us forward to September 2001 and Monday Night Raw. We've got a singles match with Lance Storm and the current King of the Ring and Intercontinental Champion Edge. So Lance, I didn't write down how the match finished, but the match finishes, maybe Edge beats him, I think. But Lance Storm starts beating him down. So at this point, I can't remember who was on. It's JR and Paul Heyman that's on commentary. And at this point, they must now mention that the man entering the ring to help Edge out is his brother about 500 times. It's so weird. It's his brother, his Canadian brother, his actual brother. Anyway, Christian comes out, and you think, here comes his tag team partner, his brother, kayfabe brother, to help him out. And I think he ends up like kind of shooting Lance Storm off. But then he grabs a chair and smashes him with the chair, turns on his brother, kayfabe brother, Edge. He grabs the big Stanley Cup style King of the Ring trophy and smashes him with that. And then just to fully top it off, he goes back out, he grabs another chair, he places Edge's head on the chair and hits him with the one-man concerto. Captain Charisma is born. It's it's probably not the greatest heel turn of all time, but the people involved just totally make it for me. So the next night on SmackDown, Christian comes out, starts the show off, and kicks off with an amazing kind of spiteful heel promo about Edge holding him down and all this sort of stuff. And in advance of this happening, they'd been sprinkling in the kind of jealousy angle. After Edge had won King of the Ring, Christian was doing a lot of celebrating with the trophy. I think he'd be doing a lot of celebrating with the Intercontinental belt as well. So you could probably see it coming. It's just devastating, like, especially now with what we know about head trauma and all that sort of stuff. Him sticking that chair under his head and slamming the chair over him is just horrible. This is a proper good way to completely turn and break up that union. So they feud for a bit there. They go on. They have a really good match at Unforgiven 2001, which Christian actually wins, which was quite surprising to me. I don't remember that being the case, but then going back and watching it, Christian won the title from Edge. And I don't know if you remember or not, but was that then the opportunity they used to then springboard Edge through the kind of glass ceiling?
So yeah, because I mean, it's one of those. I have memories of all this happening. I couldn't have thought exactly when it all happened, but because Christian was one of my favourites, and like any time we're going through this list, he'll probably be mentioned by me a few times. But I don't know. Thinking back about it, I would have always assumed Edge won every matchup between them. You know, just because it felt like he rocketed up to the top, and Christian was always kind of in that European Intercontinental tag. You know, he was at that level. So yeah, that's surprising, and I do have memories of it because Edge probably was the one from that era at that level who did manage to break through to the very top tier.
It's a common theme with, not so much with the heel turns, but with these really classic. I've got another one on this list. Really classic, technical, really enjoyable, like proper wrestling matches is that they tend to be around that kind of intercontinental level. Like you probably think the same kind of guys as me. Like was that WrestleMania 2000 where you had Jericho, Angle, and Benoit, and they just had that ridiculous wrestling match where they're suplexing each other all over the shop.
Yeah.
And there's something about the Intercontinental Championship, especially I think when we were a wee bit younger, that just lent itself to just these amazing matches.
I think it was always kind of thought of as the workhorse belt. So like the world champ wouldn't necessarily be making all the towns. You know, he'd only go to the big events, but people would be, you know, blown away by some awesome intercontinental level match as their main event. And I think that just made sure that everyone was, like, you know, happy with what they were getting, even if they weren't getting a Hogan or a Warrior or someone like that. But yeah, I mean, the guys you mentioned, to be fair, they kind of all did eventually, some a bit briefer than others, break through to that very top tier. And Edge was kind of among them. He was the only. It's going to be an odd phrase to use, but he was the sort of WWE homegrown one that made it. The others came from either WCW or, if you look at somebody like Angle, came from another sport already with a name and things like that. So yeah, I assume they always knew he was going to be the guy, and that Christian was going to be the other guy. It's a shame for me because I'd always wondered, and it's probably been mentioned in other podcasts, if Christian wasn't aligned with Edge breaking through, could he have gone a bit further on his own? Because you always compare the two, and he can't really win that comparison.
Yeah, it's like Hardy Boys as well. It's like that classic thing of like a really good tag team. There's one that you probably earmark. It's going to be the singles star.
Yeah, I think it's always the case, and again, we're probably going to mention one a little bit later on our list.
Okay, cool. Well, that was good. We've managed to get through the first picks without duplicating. So, hit me with your number 4.
So, my number 4, and this is totally different actually from the way I looked at the first one. So the first one with the slow build and all that. This all happened really quickly, but for me, just in a really cool, entertaining way. So I think we all know the backstory around The Rock. He comes into WWE, third generation, huge push, now quite a well-known movie star. And he had something, but they weren't using him right, and they were forcing him down people's throats, and they were rejecting him. It's a lot like what's happened with some modern day people like Roman Reigns. I think people would just respect everything about him a lot more if he hadn't been shoved down their throats. But turning him heel was a really good move. So with The Rock, he floundered around as a babyface, and then he got a real life injury, so they had to take him off TV for a while. And when they brought him back into the Nation. And they were a heel group, and I had thought about talking about, because he did an awesome promo when he came out and talked about the fact people chanted "Die Rocky Die" and things like that, and that gave him every reason to become a heel. But I didn't pick this moment because I don't know that you would count it as a full turn when the crowd, even though he was a babyface, the crowd hated him anyway in the first instance. So I went a little bit further down the line because he started with the Nation having awesome matches with Triple H around the Intercontinental Belt across most of the 98, and there was the whole DX against the Nation thing, which played off really well in elevating both of them as stars and kind of bringing up everyone around them as well. And then there was a point when he'd become the leader of the Nation, so he'd ousted Farouk, and he'd had that turn performed on him. And then it was October 98, Judgment Day, there's a Rock v Mark Henry match, and Mark Henry's up and coming, but he's in the Nation, so he's considered beneath The Rock. And they basically oust The Rock from the Nation. And he's already, been getting big babyface reactions with his catchphrases and things like that. And he's, again, cool heel probably before becoming a face, because all of his group turn on him, really. But as I say, he had the promos, and he was getting over anyway. He was huge, and he was on the rise. So The Rock's no longer in the Nation. He's solo now, which just allows him to sort of elevate a bit further. He's not having to do promos on behalf of a group, and he's still behind Austin, but he's probably by this point up to second in terms of fan favourites. We come to Survivor Series 98, November 98, the Deadly Game, and it was one of my favourite events because I think I don't think WWE management like them, but I love a tournament that means something. So they're having the Survivor Series tournament for the title, and the narrative going in is Vince McMahon is the heel owner, and he doesn't want Austin or Rock winning it. He has kind of earmarked Mankind as his guy, which seems like an odd fit. You know, looking back, it seems like a really odd fit because, you know, why would you want that guy as the face of your company and things like that? But at the time, it was so fully believable that he was so against Austin or Rock winning it because he was anti-fan at the time, is the way it came across. And he wanted someone that he had a measure of control over, which he did seem to with Mankind, who, you know, went through phases of calling him dad and things like that. It was a really, really weird dynamic. It's messed up. So yeah, we get into the tournament, and it's one of those where, you know, the brackets and the deck just seem stacked against the baby faces. So you've got things like the Rock gets put in there with a replacement opponent who is Boss Man. And he comes down, wielded his nightstick, and Rock beats him in 5 seconds and things like that. Yeah. And you're just like, okay, I think I started becoming aware watching it. This is maybe Rock's tournament rather than Austin's tournament. And it's just the way it was all stacking up for him. But they had Mankind going in against folk like Gilbert, you know, and he was getting easy squash matches because they were just stacking the draw in his favour to try and help him win. Rock has to beat the likes of Shamrock, who's also aligned with the corporation. Mankind's beating Al Snow. Rock has to beat Undertaker. He does manage to shunt Austin out of the picture, gets him out of the tournament. I think it's like a double DQ or double count out or something like that. So somebody else takes the hit basically to get Austin out of it, which leaves Rock as the remaining big baby face that's in it. And so you get to the final match, and this is 1 year after the Montreal Screwjob. So the previous series had seen, you know, the infamous ring the bell when the sharpshooter's on. So Mankind is basically working the match as a heel. He's taking shortcuts. He's trying everything to win the title because that's what Vince wants. And the Rock manages at a point to apply the sharpshooter when Vince and Shane are at ringside trying to help out Mankind any way they can. And then it just all becomes clear over a few seconds what's going on, because as soon as the sharpshooter's on, McMahon recreates his ring the bell, gets in the ring, raises Rock's hand, hands in the title, and you kind of... There's just this... I thought it was awesome because I felt like the Rock maybe worked better in the heel role. I thought you got more value, especially when you have Austin there anyway. But there was also like this. I remember feeling really bad for Mankind, and you know, I'm watching it thinking, I know this isn't real. You know, I know this guy, you know, is still getting his paycheck and all that, but I'm sat there thinking, how harsh is that? It's brutal on this guy. Because he had no idea what was going on, and then, you know, he's just looking on, bemused by everything. But I loved the tournament feel, and then the ending, just when it felt like they were starting to elevate Rock to that top babyface slot, to have him turn, and I just really enjoyed it. But it's as much because I loved that particular pay-per-view and the way it all unfolded. But what it gave, which was really important, McMahon-Austin was the big feud. McMahon proved enough times he can't get in the ring and work the match, you know, or he did once or twice, but he shouldn't. But he
should never, ever have taken that bump off the cage. It's the Valentine's Day Massacre.
No, definitely.
One of the horrendous bumps ever.
What it gave was, now that Rock's aligned with Vince, basically Vince has a guy, a top star, who can oppose Austin in the ring and basically do his dirty work for him. And that led to, you know, I think it's 2 WrestleMania main events in 3 years or something like that between the two. over the title because they were the top tier guys, and it just works better when one's heel and one's babyface.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, 2 questions for you then. First, was that a double turn? Did Mankind turn face, or did it turn face by default?
It wasn't at the time. I don't think the feeling I had, which was just of sympathy, I don't think that carried into the main, audience who probably would have struggled back then to buy him as the babyface, because there was a lot of work the company actually did on him eventually, where they did things like there was a sit down interview with JR that was filmed in segments, and he ends up talking about how JR keeps saying on commentary, he doesn't feel pain, he's screaming, I feel pain, and things like that. I think that's what got him over in a more human way to the audience. And then I think when he started doing things like flying off cages, that's when, and the thing is, he was actually a really good worker, because if you look at people like Triple H and even people like Michaels, some of their better matches are against him, and it's because he gives so much to the opponent. And he actually, I think, just to use Triple H as an example, I think people still thought of him as a bit soft until he did hardcore matches with Foley, and then you're like, well, it can't be soft, That's so I think that's the kind of thing that more got him over. I think at the time he was a little bit caught in what was happening with Rock and Austin, so he was a little bit marginalised from that. But I felt it, I felt, what a shame for that guy.
Mm-hmm. And Rock, better face or heel?
Me, I think especially there's an arrogance about him, and I think you're always going to have a level of the audience that cling to that and enjoy that. But I think he could do more as a heel. Like, he's not the "I'm one of you" guys, which Austin was. You don't look at him and think, "Oh, that guy's just like me." He's, especially after he ended up going away to Hollywood, and then coming back and things like that. But by then, he perfectly suited heel for me, because he came back with that "I'm too good for this" type attitude. Yeah.
Arrogance. Yeah, absolutely. No, I like him much better as a heel as well. I think a lot of guys are better at heels. Maybe Austin's, maybe not one of them, but yeah, I'm with you. Cool, that was good. I like that. Want me to jump in? Number 4 for me. Okay, so this one involves The Rock as well, but it's not The Rock Dwayne Johnson. It's The Rocket Owen Hart, and then him turning on his brother Bret the Hitman Hart. So this is not quite, I would say, not quite as good as the path that you laid out with Hogan and Savage, but this was a similar slow build, and I think just because of the time that it happened as well. So back in November '93 Survivor Series, we had the Hart brothers, Owen, Bret, and the other 2, Keith.
I think that's right. Yeah, maybe. I think those are the guys.
They were up against Shawn Michaels and his team, and I think Bret eventually ends up winning the whole match, but Owen ended up getting counted out, and he was not very happy with this at all. So when Bret's celebrating, Owen's pulling him down for the turnbuckles and having a right good go at him. But I think at this point you're kind of thinking he's just the younger brother sort of thing. He's just playing up sort of thing. So, but after this, Owen kept going at it though. It wasn't just like a kind of one-off thing. He started wearing Bret's sunglasses, which I always really, really wanted to be in the front row of somewhere and put on my face. And he adopted the sharpshooter as well. He's cutting all these sit-down promos talking about living in Bret's shadow and all that sort of thing. But anyway, much to Stu Hart's happiness, they make up for the holidays. They make up with Christmas coming, and all is good. heading into the Royal Rumble, where they're going to take on the Quebecers for the tag team titles. Unfortunately for the Hart brothers, Brett ends up injuring his knee, and the referee calls the match. Owen's not happy about this. He starts tearing into Brett again, and turns on him, kicks his knee, and this is him, full heel. Owen is fed up being in Brett's shadow. He's constantly challenging him to a match, and Brett keeps saying he will never, ever fight his brother. Alas, after this, it leads up to WrestleMania 10, Madison Square Gardens, where they have an absolute ripper of a technical masterclass. Probably, I don't know if it's underrated or not, but to me it seems like a really, really underrated WrestleMania match. It's just incredible, and like that was the match that I was watching before we started recording here. I feel like I could have just watched that all night. Like, compare that to, I don't know, like a Roman Reigns or a Drew McIntyre, who are like top stars and are good to watch, but compare that to that, it's just night and day. So Owen beats Brett at WrestleMania 10, but having won the Royal Rumble, or being, I think he was co-winner of the Royal Rumble that year, Brett gets to fight for the title at WrestleMania 10 as well, wins it, much to Owen's unhappiness. And kind of through the summer, Owen wins King of the Ring. We get the King of Hearts gimmick, which is really underrated as well, I think. And that leads us up to SummerSlam 94 with an absolute, another classic match, cage match between Brett and Owen, which Brett ends up winning. That's for the title, but I just think a really good turn from Owen. He kind of goes from this kind of like white meat babyface type to like a really angry, spiteful brother. I think it's a really good storyline. And he plays the part well. And Brett, to me, is just, I know eventually Brett turned in a kind of weird way where he was a heel in America and a face in Canada. But to me, Brett is always and always will be the kind of perfect baby face. So I think Owen had a really good partner in that rivalry.
I like it.
That was my number 4.
This is the first time we're going to have this, so I had that as one of mine. So what I loved about it, and you kind of touched on it, I always wondered if the match at Mania 10 was a little bit overshadowed by the fact that they also had the ladder match at that event between Razor and Michaels, because I don't know if people come away only talking about one match, and maybe if that ladder one hadn't happened there, maybe they would have come away talking about the Hearts match, because it was brilliant. And I wondered, your thoughts are, do you think they should have at any point put the belt on Owen? Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's like hindsight's 2020, but like, looking back now, when you know everything, and I've watched that episode of Dark Side of the Ring a couple of times now, you just wonder, and I think he deserved it. And for, like him going into the Attitude Era, and I'm not really knowing what to do with him, and then like Jericho talked about it on that episode, the guys that were coming through at the time when his untimely death happened. Like, you've got guys like Benoit and Jericho and Guerrero and Angle that just had totally just amazing matches with. It would have been. I think they should have.
Agreed. And I think you're right. After the Angle, and even though there were reunions and things like that, and they brought all the Hearts together again, I think there was always more to him from that point onwards. He was no longer, just opening match high flyer, with no real personality about him. Because that was the way it always felt before that.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that I think that King of Hearts gimmick is like he's kind of best gimmick and character they had. Yeah. Anyway, so what number did you have that down as your 3?
As my 2, but what I can do, because I do have notes about one that I moved out, that I shuffled out when I changed my mind, so I can bring that back in because I've got the notes here.
Okay.
Number 3, right.
So number 3.
We've kind of just referenced it. So this is one that I was going to have in, ended up taking it out. But I do still look back fondly in terms of memories of it. I'm similar to you. I always thought of Bret Hart as the good guy. You know, he was, I don't know, intercontinental good guy that had the brilliant matches. You know, I remember there was a SummerSlam match with Perfect that he had, which was amazing, and it just seemed like he had so many really good matches. And then he moved to the world title picture, and I think, much as I like him as a worker, you know, I thought he was always impressive to watch. I don't know that he had that cutting edge from a personality point of view, and it just always came across a bit meh a lot of the time. And then I remember he left after he lost to Michaels, so he lost the belt to Michaels at Mania 12, I think it was, in the Iron Man. Yeah.
The Iron Man match.
Michaels had got over as a babyface, so it was kind of babyface against babyface, which is unusual. And then Hart was taking a break anyway. He was away to do a TV show, and oh god,
yeah, what was that TV? you get points if you can get that.
But, so he goes away, and then he comes back, and he's kind of got a little bit more of an obnoxious personality. And what had happened while he was away was something that I think most, you know, wrestling fans of any length of time will remember as the King of the Ring, where Austin won. So he wins it, he gives his promo, his Austin 316, all that. Yeah. And, you know, within weeks, he's one of the hottest acts in the company. He's, you know, people are holding signs with his slogans on it and things like that. But while that's all happening, he's actually calling out Bret Hart on TV. So he, you know, goes in the ring when Hart isn't there. You know, everyone knows he's not there, and he's basically saying Bret Hart won't come back because he's scared to face me. Because Austin's still acting heelish, even though he's massively over, he's saying things like that. So Bret Hart ends up coming back. I think it was 8 months he was away. So he comes back just in time for Survivor Series, which is November 96. And they have a pretty good match, Hart and Austin. And it's for the number one contendership for the world title. So Hart wins. So he's back in number one contender pretty quickly. But he actually fails to take the title off Sid. So he's number one contender, but he loses, and that's due to a mistake by Michaels, who is ringside and swings a chair aiming for Sid, hits Bret, costs Bret the match. So it's kind of, you feel like the story's going away from Austin Hart to Michaels Hart, which it very often did. But then there's a brilliant Royal Rumble match, January 97, where, again, Austin's still skating the sort of fine line between cool heel and full-on babyface. And Hart eliminates him from the Rumble, but none of the refs actually see it. And Austin slides back in the ring, ends up winning it, eliminating Hart last. So, you know,
is that the Rumble where Austin is putting people out and then sitting on the top of the ropes and giving it his classic head?
I think that might be the year later.
Is that Rumble?
Because I think he wins 2 in a row.
Is that the next?
But I'd need to look at the matches to remind myself. It could be. I'm sure it's one where he wins it. But yeah, I'm sure he wins 2 in a row. So yeah, the Bret Hart next night, again still in January '97, basically comes out on Raw and says, if this is going to stand, if a Rumble defeat where a guy who'd been eliminated by him actually wins it is going to stand, then he quits. So they come up with a plan to try and keep Hart happy and try and right the wrongs. And I think this is maybe still in this sort of Jack Tunney, this president era who announces things. Yeah, he'll appear once every couple of years to announce something. So he announces something called the Final Four for an In Your House in February '97, which is supposed to be to decide on the new number one contender since Austin's Rumble win was so dubious. So it's basically to decide who gets the Mania title match against Michaels. However, Michaels around this point lost his smile, relinquishes his title and disappears. Okay. So they actually end up making the Final Four match for the title rather than for a shot at it. So Final Four, Hart wins it, and Austin, he can't really cope with this. He's built up this hatred of Hart that Hart's cost him by challenging everything that happened in the Rumble, even though he cheated. And he's just got this bee in his bonnet about Hart, and he won't let it go. And he's challenging him all over the place. And then Austin ends up costing Hart the world title belt on a Raw against Sid. So Sid regains the world title because of Austin's interference in the match. And then you've got the situation where they end up pivoting to go to Sid v Undertaker at the WrestleMania as the main event for the title. But with the animosity still there between Austin and Hart, it's decided that they should have a Mania 13 match, which should be a submission match. I've heard plenty suggesting Austin wasn't that happy about that because he never really thought of himself as a submission wrestler, and he was thinking, how do we make this work? But what ends up happening in the match, they've got the nice sort of twist is they've got Ken Shamrock appearing first time, and he's the special guest ref, and it's supposed to be, I'm assuming he's already signed with them, he just hadn't started appearing as a competitor yet, but it's basically this guy being known as a MMA fighter, and if there's anything that needs broken up in the ring, he'll be able to do it. He can cope with this situation, this hatred and animosity. They end up having a brilliant match, Austin and Bret Hart, and really subtly, if you watch through it, Hart starts taking shortcuts, and he's already been coming across as quite whiny, not the way a babyface would normally be when he's talking about being screwed out of things and losing his title shots and losing his belt and things like that. And he's actually had by then a confrontation with McMahon, almost giving away with a few comments that McMahon's the owner, as well as just being this guy sitting ringside on the commentary set, which hadn't really been referenced at any point beforehand. So they have their brilliant match, and Hart's little, he does the figure four around the ring post and things like, just things that maybe your babyface version wouldn't do, because they would want it to be clean and in the ring. And Austin, he's a lot of his style's brawling, but there's this finish where Hart's got Austin the sharpshooter, and Austin won't quit, and the commentators are selling it. They're saying, he won't quit, he won't tap, he won't say I quit. And what ends up happening as a result is the crowd are now sympathetic to Austin because he's given absolutely everything that he's got, and he just won't give up. And Hart, who even by the time that Shamrock's called it off saying it's done, Austin's non-responsive, he's covered in blood. They get this brilliant picture of him screaming and all the blood's flowing down his face. And he ends up passing out, and he won't break the hold, and Shamrock has to basically drag him off, and Hart not breaking the hold. And then there's this little subtle moment where Shamrock confronts Hart, and he backs down, and it's a little bit heelish, and from that point onwards, you touched on it before, in USA, the crowd are fully behind Austin. They are, he's very much established as top line babyface. A guy who, even though he'd been seen to pass out in the ring, wouldn't accept help to walk back and all that, wanted to walk back on his own 2 feet, against the guy who took the shortcuts, wouldn't break the hold, flinched when, the MMA fighter got in his face and things like that. So Hart becomes a heel in America, but remains a babyface, I think, pretty much everywhere else. They mentioned Canada, but the promos he starts delivering are actually anti-America, which is more of a, a lot of people who aren't American are anti-America. It doesn't really matter what country you're in. And I think in a lot of Europe, he was still very popular, Hart. And, you've got the combination with Bulldog, which ends up doing that as well. But I think it's the best executed double turn that I've ever seen. And it's just all because going into the match, I think that, a lot of the crowd had worm tossing already, but Bret Hart was universally loved. And it's just all these little nuances. And I think Hart, for me, it did work in a stable, him being a heel. I don't think him being a heel on his own would have really worked, but once he'd reformed the Hart Foundation and he had his family around him, I think that kind of did work. But it led to, loads of great matches, and there's an event called Canadian Stampede, I think it is, where there's basically the Canadian team of all the Hearts up against the American team, and it's in Canada, it's in Calgary, I think, and the atmosphere is unbelievable. It's like the most electric atmosphere you would find for a match. So that's kind of the one I'll plug in as the replacement for what happened with Owen, because that was one of my favourites as well.
Brilliant. I don't know if you've ever heard, you probably had, I can't put my finger on it, as maybe the Broken Skull sessions, but I've heard various different places, both Austin and Hart, talking about each other. And the way that they talk about each other, they've just got such a high level of respect for each other. And it's quite rare to hear wrestlers talking about other wrestlers like that. And it's really nice. And, they obviously enjoyed working together. And, it's very unlike WWE to do or to be able to execute such a subtle turn in character. That was cracking. I debated that one for a while. That's a good one. I like that. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm on so that was your number 3. So I'll jump onto my number 3, which I think you will probably have on your list at some place as well.
Yeah.
We're gonna go to the barber shop, Adam. We need to get together. We've been having too many differences. Let's talk them out. Alternatively, I may just stick your head through a window. So we've got the Rockers. We've got Marty Jannetty, Shawn Michaels. What would you say, like an exciting young tag team?
The big phrase I remember hearing constantly from, I think it would be Gorilla Monsoon, was tag team specialists, and it always seemed like you couldn't imagine them not teaming together.
Like they were kind of styled the same, their hair the same, all that sort of stuff. They were like a proper tag team. When you think of a tag team, I think I really like that. I like when a tag team's a tag team, if you know what I mean. So yeah, they were like this classic, young, cool looking tag team. But anyway, they'd had their differences. Marty Jannetty offers to let Shawn Michaels walk away. Shawn says no. And, he didn't mean no, really, did he? He hits him with the most beautiful super kick you've ever seen. And Jannetty's selling of throwing himself. Bobby Heenan says he tried to dive through the window and covered it. He sells it just perfectly through the window. And Sean pulls out, I don't know if it's a magazine or just a picture, but he pulls out a picture and tears it just perfectly down the middle, just to set it off beautifully. And we know what happens for there. Shawn Michaels goes on a WWE Hall of Famer, doesn't he? Does
Grand
everything.
Slam winner, is that what they call it? When somebody's won every belt and the Rumble and, basically everything there is to win. Yep.
Still never. I think just what you were talking about with Hogan. So what age would I have been then? 10. This was January '92. I'd have been 9. Like I can remember this. I can remember. I don't know how I watched this. This happened on a Raw, I think. I can remember watching it and being like so shocked, like stunned. What? Like that's a pretty a violent act, kicking someone through a window.
Yeah, that was.
So I'm saying he kicked. I'm saying he kicked him through a window. He kicked him, then he threw him through the window.
Yeah, that was going to be my number 2, and I just like so much what you talked about, the fact that Jannetty offers him an out, and that's not enough. He doesn't want to just walk away. He actually wants to do this. He wants to break them up in this, this way where there's no going back, and that is so brutal. And the fact that I remember, I think the first time I saw it, it's maybe on the build-up to a Rumble or something like that. And again, they show you some of the backstory and things like that. And when I saw it, I thought, what? When they're in the process of looking like they've reconciled, I think Heenan says something like, you see, one with the other's no good, And then as soon as the kick hits, Heenan goes, I knew he was going to do that. And there's so many brilliant, Heenan moments that we could do our own discussion about. But he adds kind of weight to these kind of things, and as soon as he's on somebody's side, it makes him feel like a proper heel. And the actual visual of them going through the glass from the barbershop, again, like you mentioned, that you just didn't see things like that. It was so unusual, and these were, I think at the time I couldn't imagine either of them being like the world title holder or anything like that. They were two guys that seemed like they needed each other to have any success. So yeah, it just seemed brutal. Brilliant though.
Yeah. And just and on that point, like that was probably what you were saying about Christian, like a kind of European level type guy doing that, but it felt like it really mattered. And also it's kind of like a flick of a switch with Shawn Michaels, and then he just looked like this smug, arrogant heel.
Yeah, I loved it. And again, the aligned Sensational Sherry as well. And he started doing the Heartbreak Kid with the horrible, obnoxious entrance music and stuff like that. And it just all worked. And you look forward to, or you look back at the sort of difference where their careers went. And I think I mentioned to you before, apparently Jannetty's been hired and fired more times than anyone else in company history, which is quite an achievement. But you kind of, you look back feeling bad, because obviously, even if they thought, Jannetty can make it to this level, or we put him in another tag team or something like that, but they obviously always had bigger plans for Michaels. I don't think they had world title plans for him, but I think they always thought that's a guy that can make it on his own. And I'm not sure, people do refer to, he's the Shawn Michaels of the team. Even now, and that means that's the guy that can make it, which means the other guy can't.
Yeah, it's almost like the Rockers set that blueprint for. So who's going to turn on who, and who's going to be this? Who's, like you say, who's going to be Shawn Michaels? Like, I think people, as soon as you saw the Hardys, you start thinking, Jeff Hardy's the Shawn Michaels. I don't know if it ever really worked out that way. I don't think it did, but
Yeah, definitely.
It's like they've kind of set the blueprint. Right, I think your number one is my number two, by the sounds of it. So do you want to talk through your number one?
Yeah. So
have you done four? Yeah.
My top pick is the sort of infamous third man angle from WCW. Hulk Hogan, obviously, Ultimate Babyface, had never actually officially turned heel since re-entering WWF when McMahon had bought out his dad. He was the golden boy, he was exactly what McMahon wanted his champion to look like, which was, big, muscular, heroic. And he ends up moving to WCW, and he's basically the same character, There's not a lot, not a lot changed. He's becomes world champion. He's getting a lot of crowd adulation. They were aware, and I've watched a few programs where the crowd reactions apparently started to wane a little bit in his WCW days, sort of 95, 96. He's not getting booed by any means, but he's not necessarily getting the biggest pop of anyone that comes out. There's guys like Sting, there's been guys like Flair who are maybe getting bigger crowd reactions. And I think it's that sort of, you get a little bit of oversaturation at times. I think that's definitely happened, modern day with guys like Cena, for example, who he almost needs to go away to be appreciated, and then he comes back and people remember, all the reasons why they liked him in the first place. So big sort of moment really comes in May 96 when Hall and Nash wrestling as Diesel and Razor Ramon have their finish their contracts in WWE. They give their notice and they sign with WCW for apparently more money, less dates, everything that a worker would want in those days. WWE is the bigger product at the time. There's no real doubt about that. It's got more eyeballs on it. WCW, I think, has always been thought of as this, regional promotion. But now that Eric Bischoff is kind of in charge, he's not writing the checks, but he's in charge on the WCW side. He's trying to compete. He wants to actually, become the big show, and he's launched Monday Nitro to compete directly with Monday Night Raw. At the time, he's not winning the ratings war, but he's got Ted Turner's money to spend and a show on his network to steal some extra time when it's needed and things like that. So he's got a lot working for him. But because they're basically an organisation that's run by a TV company, the Monday night shows, they're a big deal, and I think WWF at the time are more still centred around, pay-per-views and things like that. And I think selling out all their live shows was a big money-making thing for them. But Turner's company, WCW, once he'd bought them out and sort of recreated them, they were really focused on TV ratings and things like that. So he'd basically given Bischoff a blank check, sign who you need to compete, and let's try and win. Let's try and get more ratings than WWE can get. So Hall and Nash have come across as big stars. Nash has been champion several times. Hall was always that kind of intercontinental level guy, but he would be on every show and pretty good with promos, very good worker.
I feel like he was I feel like to a young person like we were, like a kind of young teen impression, he was a big star. It always surprises me he never held the belt, but then when you think back, he was that intercontinental Mr. Perfect.
Yeah, he was, and I think a lot of that
kind of level
was about they would trust him to have the good match, and when it needed to be done to put a superstar over. And I think he, no doubt he could have performed at that top level. And I remember he had matches for it. I think he wrestled Brett Hart for the belt, and he just never quite went up that extra rung. But they came in as big names, and one of the be able to find it on many a video on the WWE network, but him walking out, through the crowd, jumping the barrier, walking into the ring during what was essentially a jobber match on a Nitro, and standing in the ring and saying, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here, to the crowd, and that acknowledgement that of course they know who he is because WWE is the bigger product. So people who are watching Nitro, in all likelihood, are also watching Raw, and so they know who this guy is. They've actually both been in WCW previously, didn't really work out brilliantly for either of them, but they've been there. But they really became stars in WWE. He teases that he's got somebody else that's going to be coming out and joining him, and they're doing this whole story, which kind of had to get shut down for legal reasons, where they're implying that he still works for WWE and he's turning up on these shows when he kind of shouldn't be. And he's challenging and threatening invasion. I think that WWE shut that down in the courts quite quickly because they argued that he's not their employee, but they're not making that clear, and also the way he was speaking, which wasn't his normal voice, was basically the exact way he spoke in his character in WWE, which WWE still owned, which made a massive misstep by recasting these characters, but we won't talk about that just now. So yeah, that 2 weeks after that, Kevin Nash appears during this interview that Bischoff's doing with Scott Hall. Basically, Bischoff's challenging Scott Hall, saying, you said there was another guy. Who is it? Nash appears behind him, and he's a tall guy. Kevin Nash, he's I don't know exactly how tall, but he's very tall. So there's this visual of Bischoff turning round to see this mountain of a man behind him, and then he delivers a similar style of promo about, how they're there to take over, and they're, if this is where the big boys play, we're not here to play. There's a few weeks of them then requesting matches against the best WCW have got to offer, and then it ends up a situation where WCW basically pick out 3 guys that they want to have a match against Hall and Nash, and that's on the understanding that Hall and Nash say that they've got a third guy. They've got a third guy that's going to be coming in. Nobody knows who it is. There's a lot of speculation. There was actually a lot of speculation at the time about Bret Hart going in because he'd been in contract negotiations with WWE. He ends up, I think that's where he maybe signs the 10-year WWE deal that in the end Vince can't afford, and kind of asks him to tear up when he leaves in the end. But there's rumours about Bret. There's a few rumours about other insiders from WCW, but not that many that make sense for me. I think Sting was mentioned, but he doesn't have a WWE background, so why, just trying to put it together why he would be the third guy. But they agree the match at Bash at the Beach, but Hall and Nash are not talking about who the third man is. They're up against Sting, Savage, and Luger. So you kind of look at it and thinking, if I didn't know better because I didn't see it at the time, but after the event, you're maybe thinking, well, it could be Savage. He came from WWE. He's in the match, so it could be him. Luger, he's been in WWE for a wee bit. Could it be him? It could be Sting, just because there'd been noise around it being Sting. So there was always the threat that it was one of the guys in the ring that were opposing them that was going to turn and create a 3-on-2 advantage. In the end, they start the match as a 2-on-3. So WCW have got the advantage, which I think just made even more people watching it think it's going to be one of those guys, because why else would the third man not be out from the start? He's putting his team at a disadvantage. So in the match, Hall and Nash are actually handling the 3 stars from WCW pretty easily. They're not really looking at defeat despite the handicap. They take a couple of different points of taking out one man to make it 2-on-2. And then just when they're kind of asserting their dominance and looking like they're about to properly go on and win the match. The Hogan appears on the ramp and walks down, and I think there's a comment by Bobby Heenan, which he apparently didn't know, and the announce team didn't know who the third man was going to be. There were only the actual man and I believe Nash and Hall and Bischoff that knew who it was. And Hogan goes in the ring, ready to save WCW, drops the leg on his old pal Macho Man, and that's it. He is the third man. He has joined the NWO, as they're christened at the end of the match. And I think just the fact that it was him, and he was always the hero, and you just wouldn't have seen it coming. And there's a promo he delivers at the end of it where, the ring is being filled up with trash being thrown by the crowd. And you never would have imagined Hogan standing there in the ring with people throwing trash in at him. And he just delivers this promo about, how the trash that's in the ring represents all these fans and things like that. And it's like you've never heard him before. So he just would never speak like that. And then
That's amazing.
When you look back at the fact that the two guys had been controlling the three of the biggest WCW stars, there's now three and one of them's Hogan. So who can actually compete with that group? And it ended up being one of like the hottest TV runs that there's ever been. I think for a good year before they oversaturated it and put too many guys in and things like that, and ended up having different segments to it and things like that. But for that little period of time, they had this like untouchable group and were absolutely cruising in the ratings war. I think largely because of that group, who were the epitome of a cool heel. They were, the crowd loved them, but almost regardless of what they actually did. So yeah, that, I think for me, I have a memory of my cousin who watched at the time all the TVs weekly on both sides. So he was watching Raw and Nitro. And he told me, he was a few years older than me, he told me that Hogan was now a bad guy. And I was like, he's not. I just absolutely refused to believe it. And that, I assume, would be how most people would have reacted at the time. They just wouldn't have believed it. So yeah, that is my number one.
I love it. There's a few things. So you mentioned Bobby Heenan's comment. So listen, I think we both absolutely love Heenan. He's just an absolute legend. Yeah. But that's one of the things that stops me putting this number one. But whose side is he on? It's just that I get it because it fits his character, because he's the heel commentator. He doesn't want to trust the baby face. But the fact that he says that, it kind of like could make you go, what?
Schiavone's podcasts with Conrad Thompson, and he was the producer within the commentary, within the announcer group. So, and he swears that nobody in that group knew. And it is a shame because he does preempt it. It just, I don't think he actually believed it when he said it. I don't think he thought that was what was going to happen, but it does. Yeah, I get you. It takes away from it a little bit.
That promo that you mentioned that Hogan cuts is amazing. Like, Hogan's got his faults, many of them, but that, like you said, that promo is just like scorching. It's amazing. And do you know what else I love about it as well? Is how annoyed Mean Gene is at him.
Yeah, and it comes obviously so annoyed. He's interviewed him so many times over the years, and they always had this dynamic, this sort of back and forth banter, and he just seems so betrayed and angry, and he's just this wee guy holding a microphone. It's pretty good.
And just one last thing on that. There's a guy in the front row, I don't know if you noticed this, there's a guy in the front row whereas everybody else is booing the house down, throwing stuff in the ring. There's this guy with an ECW t-shirt on, and he is having the time of his life.
Brilliant.
He's like clapping non-stop whilst Hogan's cutting this promo. Okay. So I'm interested to find out if this is going to be in your honourable mentions, but this is my number one. I think it's a lot of things. It's at the time probably my peak watching. I'm gonna hit you with a quote from it. It's not did we, but how many times did we consummate the marriage? So, 29th November 1999, we're all set up for the marriage between Andrew Martin, aka Test, and Stephanie McMahon. It seems like a wonderful affair. All the McMahons are all dressed up, and then Triple H crashes it, and we get the video on the Titantron of Triple H pulling up at the little white chapel with Stephanie in tow. He does an absolute classic kind of comedy move with mouthing her vows for her in a silly voice. It's amazing. I was actually like watching this back. I was surprised at how charismatic Triple H was. I don't even know if he's supposed to be a heel or a face at this point, but it's hilarious. And you've got Stephanie in the ring crying her eyes out, saying "I hate you" and all that sort of thing. Which, like, Stephanie these days, and probably like round about Ruthless Aggression era and all that, is completely over the top sort of character. But at that point, she was kind of like that young, kind of just new on TV, fresh faced character. I thought she played it really, really well. So this, after Triple H doing, we get this kind of personal, like a kind of Austin McMahon light sort of rivalry between Vince and Triple H, and Shane, I think, as well. We get Vince screwing Triple H at the title at the title match at Survivor Series with Big Show and The Rock, which leads us to Armageddon, 1999. Probably one of the longest matches in wrestling history, or matches that went on for far too long. We got a no holds barred match between Vince and Triple H. They're in and out the crowd. It's certainly no Owen versus Brett, that's for sure. But we get to the end. We've got Vince with a sledgehammer. We've got Stephanie sitting front row of the crowd. She says, "I want to do it." She comes in the ring, and she looks like she's going to hit Vince. She can't do it. Triple H takes it off her, and like we were talking about head trauma earlier, like, I don't know if this is just amazing selling, but he looks like he takes Vince's head off of the thing. It's ridiculous. Anyway, afterwards we get the turn. Stephanie smiles, that kind of smile at Triple H, and they have this kind of awkward cuddle. But I think I picked this number one for that segment on Raw. Triple H's charisma levels, like I said, are off the charts, and also, although to some people's mind, Triple H's Reign of Terror wasn't the greatest thing to be watching every single week, but I loved the kind of McMahon Helmsley era. I think it probably defines the longest period of time I had watching wrestling.
I think
I love Triple H. So yeah,
there was an interesting thing happened. I was still watching at this time, probably maybe 94 to about 2001 or 2002. I think I was watching constantly. And I remember all this happening. What I was trying to think of, so this must have just been post DX, was it, or post? He must have, because I don't think he was ever with Stephanie in the DX environment.
Yeah. So
right.
So WrestleMania 15, he turned on DX. He joined a version of the corporation, and they had that amazing awful music they had for about 5 minutes. I think that must be before then.
Right. And then
I think that must be that same year, earlier in the year.
Watching it with one of my friends who wasn't really a wrestling fan. It was one of those like a Sunday morning repeat thing or something like that, and I just had it on, and my pal's waking himself up and getting ready to go home, and he didn't actually believe that was the daughter of the owner. You know, that was the real life family that were playing this out in the ring. And I'm like, no, really, that's the owner, that's his daughter, that's his son. But at the time, I don't think Triple H and Stephanie were a real couple when they first started on TV together. I think that, yeah. So yeah, I was trying to convince him. These are the actual people. And it's like, wow, that's just messed up. Yeah.
You should probably never let that friend know about some of the storylines that Vince had with Stephanie.
Less said about that, the better. Yeah, it wasn't one I thought of, actually. I remember it well, and I remember being quite shocked when she turned, because, I suppose in hindsight, you maybe would see it coming, but at the time, I don't think I thought she was going to be a regular character. And she came across as so innocent, and I thought she's just in here for one storyline, and then they'll move on. But obviously, she's been a feature for almost ever since. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Let's recap, shall we? So, at 5,
yes,
you had the Mega Powers colliding, didn't you?
Yep.
And I had Christian Edge, the one-man concerto.
Yes.
At 4, you had who? The Rock turning heel. Deadly Game. And I had Owen Hart turning on Brett. 3.
Yep.
You had Austin and Brett double turn. And I had Mark Jannetty getting diving in an act of cowardice through the barbershop window. That was your 2, and Hogan joining the NWO, or the New World Organization of Wrestling Brother, as he said in his promo.
So I had.
Yeah, it was good. What did you have in your honourable mentions?
Putting in that was in my honourable mentions, because I had one of yours in my actual lineup as well. Was Rollins turning on the Shield, and it was I was kind of back watching quite regularly at the point, but it wasn't so much about the fact that someone broke them up and aligned with Triple H and turned heel. It was more about the guy that they chose, because I don't know why, but in my mind he seemed the least likely. And there's that moment where they're in the ring, and they've just had this brilliant series of matches with whoever Triple H could pull together. I remember one with Orton and Batista, and up against the Shield. And, it was pretty obvious to me that all the Shield guys were going to end up becoming, individual stars. But I thought, well, Reigns is being lined up to be the guy. And they've gone that way, but I think I just assumed they would do it immediately. But then it was Rollins that turned, and when he hits Reigns on his back with the chair, when they're standing in the ring being confronted by Triple H, etc., I was really taken by surprise, because I just thought, oh, he's the guy. Okay. And it worked, because I think it kind of immediately established Rollins as a top guy as well. And I think it maybe did fit, because at the time he was maybe more ready to be a heel than the likes of Reigns was. Although it's working now, I think timing-wise, it was probably the right move, but I think it really did take me by surprise at the time. And I remember, he kind of goes through this thing of thinking if they'd broken them up too soon, and they probably did get it right, actually. They'd probably done everything they could as a group. But yeah, that was one of my honourable mentions. I'm just looking at my notes because I definitely had another.
Do you know what I like about that harks back to what you said at the start there about lining yourself up with something at the end of it, and Seth went on to become like a really good, arrogant, cowardly, cackling heel with his head shaking, and that probably
found
did
my other one. Only had two that I wrote anything about really. And the other one was Vince Screws Brett. And not so much the action of what happened on the night of the screw job, but more the aftermath. So, like, he does the sit-down interview with JR, and he basically puts all the blame on Brett and comes up with the famous Brett screwed Brett line, and from there, the Mr. McMahon character that ended up face to face with Austin for all that time, it may never have quite got there if it wasn't for something like that. So I do think that was an important one. But the more I looked at it and the more I thought about it, I like a heel turn where you've got an established babyface that turns heel. Whereas I was thinking McMahon, he's just viewed as a commentator. So I was struggling to say it was really a heel turn from that, because it's hard to say what he was in the first instance, really.
On paper, Vince, the owner of the company who was this commentator, feuding with your top babyface, shouldn't work.
Yeah.
Like, it's the hottest storyline probably, arguably ever. It shouldn't work on paper, but I get what you're saying. Like, you don't have Mr. McMahon without that, and the whole thing of him being on screen and him being so visible, and Brett spitting in his face. Like, he's doing that for a reason, and you maybe didn't realise that at that point. Like, that takes you to Deadly Game the next year, and him being so prominent and all that. The only honourable mention which I had, and this isn't so much to do with the heel turn, but it was more to do with the character that came out the heel turn, was Daniel Bryan. And he beat AJ Styles after AJ's 371-day reign as champion. He was this pure babyface. He hits AJ Styles with a low blow, and you hear the crowd properly like gasping, and that's quite an innocent kind of reaction to, oh my goodness, this baby just done that. He hits AJ with a low blow, hits him with his knee, and afterwards he starts stamping on his, that face stamp that he does over and over again. He's doing that to him. And from there, it's like they just flipped a switch and off he went. And you had this, the new Daniel Bryan character who was essentially telling people the truth about what they were doing to their bodies and the environment, but he was getting like ultra heat for it. He's just an amazing character. It's a shame that didn't go for longer than it did. I just think he's one of the guys that's amazing as a face and a heel.
Even though he'd obviously just done this really heelish act, people were still so happy that he was back that they didn't really want to hate him, and but then he just kept pushing it further and further and further, and he was so believable in it. And I think that, one of the important things for a heel, you can't just be spouting nonsense. There has to be at least bits of truth in what you're saying, and you know, if that's there, then you're basically left with an audience of saying, yeah, I get it, but I hate that guy. You know, I think if it's just nonsense and there's no substance to anything that's being said, it's too easy to dismiss.
Yeah. People are smarter these days than we were when we were watching Hogan and Macho Man and the Rockers.
Definitely.
Like, you'd see through a silly angle so easily these days that somebody like that cutting promos like that,
Yeah.
it sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's just really, really good to watch. And like, without that, you don't have Kofi Mania, and the kind of high of, is that WrestleMania 35 of Kofi winning the belt and all that, and Brian needs to take a lot of credit for kind of carrying that through as well. I think was that Elimination Chamber, was that the pay-per-view before WrestleMania, maybe a couple before, and Brian and Kofi were going at it for
and it made
a good
it
15-20 minutes at the end of that Elimination
that,
Chamber. It was just amazing.
Kofi Kingston could go from, you know, career mid-carder to actually winning the world title, because without that happening, it would have been, you know, out of nowhere, you know, and you can't do that. People don't buy it, but just that instance in the cell that makes the whole angle realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mean like just like overnight him jumping into an F5 and losing the belt?
That was to. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was just a desperate
Forget
TV ratings on the first SmackDown on Fox, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that sums it up, doesn't it?
Cool. That was good fun.
Amazing. Well, that was excellent. Thank you. Do you want to maybe introduce what we are looking into talking about in our next episode?
Yeah. So we talked this through, and we were thinking there's obviously been Royal Rumble events for 20 plus years, which is quite terrifying. Sorry, it's more than that, isn't it? It's 30 plus years, which is quite terrifying. But we were going to focus on the actual Rumble match rather than the pay-per-view event as a whole. So basically, which Rumble match, or what were your top 5 Rumble matches? Because I think my mind started going into things like, you know, surprise appearances, surprise winner, and there's so many different categories that I can think of to try and put things in. But yeah, Royal Rumble matches, top 5, and I imagine again there might be a couple of similarities in there, but there might be less this time actually.
Yeah.
I did go back last year.
I tell you, I'm having a lot of fun researching it.
It's been a good starting point for me. Yep.
Amazing. Oh well, cool. I look forward to that. Well, awesome. That concludes.
I knew I already had the middle-aged part, but
how does it feel to be a middle-aged outlaw?
Cool. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Bye. Until next time, buddy.